The theme for this month in our worship service is activism. If you look at the UU World magazine, it may appear that activism is the theme of our whole faith tradition all of the time. Here at Tapestry, issues of justice making hold a prominent place in our life together. We tend to celebrate the hard work many of our members do to build beloved community. But the question remains, are we a congregation of activists? Does one have to be an activist to be a good Unitarian Universalist? Some of my favorite memories of college involved activism. Some of it was that usual holding picket signs and writing letters to the editor kind of activism. What I enjoyed most, though, was the more subversive kind of activism. This was in the late 90s in Oklahoma. It didn't take much to cause a stir as young queer people. I remember occasionally holding hands with my male friend when we walked on campus. There was nothing romantic between us at all. But we were just friends who appreciated the opportunity to create some visibility for LGBT people and make a little more space for our friends to feel more comfortable. If that seems mild, I'll remind you that same-sex couples in California in 2023 still are much noticed displaying any kind of affection in public. I also remember one night on a weekend, for some reason, the plans changed suddenly. This was back in college. Maybe a party that we had gone to ended early. We were definitely on a mission to have a good time, and a couple of friends were in drag. For whatever reason, that night we decided not to make the 45-minute drive to Oklahoma City to go to gay bars. Instead, we went, probably a group of 12 guys, some in drag, to one of the bars near campus. And we all had an amazing time dancing and having fun, being out and visible in a way that strangely felt like it made a difference. I remember telling my friend that night that activism comes in many different shapes and sizes. And it does. There are 1,000 different ways to make a difference. I don't know that you would call it activism so much as living your life without apology. People in marginalized identities make choices every day about how much of their culture they will share with the world. In their fashion, in the way they speak, in the general way they show up in the world. How much will they celebrate their own culture and how much will they blend in to a conventional standard of what is appropriate or beautiful? The history and culture of hair for African Americans is way more complicated than I know enough about to dive into well. One thing I do know is that part of that conversation around Blackness is about how Black people, especially Black women, but also men, how they will don a hairstyle that's more in keeping with European American norms. Or how much will they adhere to a culture and a style that they choose themselves? Is it activism, or is it a hairstyle that reflects your personal taste and culture? Language poses a similar question. If English is your second language, will you speak your first language with friends and family out in public because it makes other people more uncomfortable, or will you shift your language? Will you use your given name in business settings, when ordering coffee, when meeting other people, or will you choose a name that's more easily understood in the culture where you are? Gender expression is another way of rocking the boat. Whether we realize it or not, all of us make choices about how gender expression will be in our clothes or our hairstyle or our makeup. How much will adhere to traditional binary gender norms and how much will transgress those norms. All of these small decisions take emotional energy. And each time someone authentically chooses to show up in the world, in a way that transgresses respectable expectations. They nudge society toward greater openness and make room for other people to be their whole selves. Sometimes just showing up makes the difference. And sometimes the real difference is made behind the scenes where no one even notices. The 1963 March on Washington was one of the most visible and successful pieces of activism in American history. It's often remarked how powerful the speakers were, or how 250,000 people gathered peacefully. What we don't often talk about is the behind-the-scenes support that made that day successful. Think about transporting, housing, feeding, providing facilities for 250,000 people at a single gathering. I read up this week how some of that feeding happened. Some very hard-working change makers heeded the call. In New York, volunteers at the Riverside Church gathered at 3 o'clock in the morning to make bagged lunches. The meal included a cheese sandwich, some marble cake, and an apple that marchers could buy for 50 cents. These volunteers, mostly women, worked in shifts for 13 hours until 4 p.m. in the afternoon, until they had boxed 80,000 lunches. I came across a very powerful picture that most of us haven't seen about that tremendous day in our history. But it's a picture of the African-American women who worked tirelessly at that church boxing lunches. I want to share it, and I will email it out to you because it was a reminder to me this week that that is what activism looks like. Countless people have helped bend the arc of history toward justice in ways that we usually don't even recognize. Parents have done their best to raise children that are kind and virtuous. I think parenting is one of the biggest influences that a person can have on the world. Of course, it's more complicated than carving a little person out of clay. There's a lot of uncertainty. Those of you who have been involved in raising kids or teaching, please know that what you do for your children or your grandchildren or your students is a gift to the world. I know you did it for those kids that you care so deeply about, but what you have given is a far bigger gift than you realize. One other form of activism that I have to mention is perhaps the most courageous and builds the most important kind of change: having hard conversations with people you disagree with. I'm not talking about posting things on social media. I mean, stating calmly what you believe. If someone makes a comment about politics or insinuates racism, sexism, or any other ism, if someone else starts the conversation, we're within our rights to ask some follow-up questions or simply state that we don't agree, or even tell them why they are wrong. It takes confidence and grounding to have a hard conversation. And anytime any one of us finds that courage to do so is a gold star moment. Now, occasionally people describe Tapestry as a social justice-oriented congregation or talk about how progressive we are. That's largely a matter of perspective. Compared to some of our neighboring Orange County faith communities, yes, Tapestry tends to be more outspoken. However, within the context of Unitarian Universalism, that isn't so much the case. In my very subjective observations, based on conversations I have with UU ministers and based on what I see at General Assembly and in the UU World magazine, Tapestry is quite moderate among UU congregations. In fact, I would say tapestry is slightly on the side of more conservative in the realm of Unitarian Universalist congregations. That isn't a critique. This is just an invitation for us to be aware of who we are as a community. Context is everything. Tapestry has had quite a bit of success with justice-oriented programs. It's worth noting that the biggest output of work and the biggest successes have been humanitarian in nature. We've largely aimed to care for people and to build compassionate relationship. Let me describe some of our programs. The mission of FOCD, that's Friends of Orange County Detainees, is to be a community of volunteers that offer regular visits to immigration detainees. They offer listening ears and compassionate hearts and an act of friendship to end isolation and affirm each person's human dignity and worth. Welcoming Neighbors Home on their webpage says, "We strive to see all of our neighbors housed. We believe in the power of housing first approach to the end of homelessness, and we advocate for permanent, supportive, affordable housing solutions. Until our goals are achieved, we also provide direct services to those in need." The Green Sanctuary program is designed to give roots and wings to the vision that together we can create a world in which all people make reverence, gratitude, and care for the living earth central to our lives. New Beginnings is a group of volunteers of Tapestry and 3 other Orange County churches whose goal is to welcome refugee families from Afghanistan to help them adjust to life in America. The main focus of our LGBTQ+ action group has been increasing awareness within Tapestry and making sure visitors of all genders feel welcomed and safe, and providing some social space that's actively affirming of LGBTQ+ people. And finally, the Women's Rights Action Group is a dynamic group of women, men, and youth gathered together to apply our Unitarian Universalist principles in support of women and women's issues. In all this work, the core has largely been about honoring human dignity and caring for people compassionately. Some of it is advocating for policy change. Most of the effort is about caring for people. It reminds me of the Reverend William Ellery Channing, the kind of founder of American Unitarianism and his commitments to justice work. He was an abolitionist and an education reformer and an advocate for women's rights to vote. The core issue for him, the core issue for us, has been about giving everyone the opportunity to thrive and seeking personal, spiritual, moral growth. As a small congregation, we have had a huge impact on Orange County. I see that impact less as activism and more as actively caring for our neighbors in need, whoever they are. In the description of this morning's sermon, I included the question, what is required to be a good Unitarian Universalist? I didn't think much about it when I wrote the question. As I thought about it, I realized we all want to belong to the community. We all want to know there's place for us here. Is there something we must do or believe or say to earn that place? The quick answer is no. There's nothing that you must do, say, or believe to be welcomed here. However, our faith does encourage all of us to engage with the world around us. I would start by pointing out the 7 principles. They are a beautiful articulation of some of our best values. They're aspirational. They're sort of a reach goal. No one is capable of living up to all of them all of the time, but we're invited to try. For today's conversation about activism, it's worth pointing out that protest signs and letters to the editor are not mentioned in the principles. The closest the 7 principles get to a specific behavior is the 5th principle. We honor and promote the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process in our congregations and in society at large. The best way, perhaps the only way to honor the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process is by exercising those rights. Vote. And when something grates against your conscience, speak up where you can. As the saying goes, use it or lose it. Now, no one's going to check for your "I voted" sticker on Sunday morning. This particular action isn't required. Still, we encourage each other to help support the value of democracy. And there's no political platform to which we all must agree. At our annual denominational gatherings, we have voted together to affirm stances in order to make a larger social critique as a whole tradition. Those are called statements of conscience and actions of immediate witness. We've affirmed stances throughout our denomination in order to make a larger critique of a moral issue. And I want to read a few of them to give you a flavor of what these talk about. These are some of the actions that were passed at General Assembly in 2022 and 2023. Stop Cop City, organizing for health equity, protect the dreamers, the recipients of DACA, with a pathway to permanent residence. We do not consent, taking action to ensure access to abortion. Stop the privatization of Medicare, anti-racism and reparations via restorative justice. Now, each of these is a multi-page document that outlines a clear ethical stance based on Unitarian Universalist theology and values. On our UUA website, there's a list of these statements that we have made dating back to 1961 when the UUA was founded. It is a great resource for reasoning through any topic that you're wondering about. And you can search by keyword. For example, when I use the keyword abortion, it brings up 22 statements. Searching by the keyword housing brings up 84 statements. I bring all this up because even with all of the work that goes into creating these statements and all the work that goes into justice work on a national and local level, there is no particular justice platform that all UUs are expected to subscribe to. And there is certainly no expectation to be a good Unitarian Universalist. We must be working for justice on a particular issue or in a particular way. It's sometimes mistakenly said that you can believe anything and be a Unitarian Universalist, or people think that this is a light and easy tradition. I hope that we are a hopeful tradition and have some fun along the way, but this is not an easy path. If Unitarian Universalism requires anything, it is that you put serious thought and discernment into your faith journey. We are not here to give easy answers or certain answers. You have to work for the answers that are right for you. And then we ask you to strive to live into those things that you find to be true. By way of benediction, the Reverend William Gardner says, "We all have two religions, the religion we talk about and the religion we live. It is our task to make the difference between the two as small as possible." There's no political litmus test or required to-do list in this faith tradition. We are not required to be activists. We do call each other into striving to live out our values and to love more actively in the world, one step at a time. Amen.